In the last video, I mentioned that I built large structure with the help of Google Maps and promised to make a separate video about it. If you were expecting some magical plugin that converts objects from Google Maps to 3D models, I will have to disappoint you. As far as I know, it doesn't exist. Although it is possible to download parts of Google Maps as 3D objects and maybe find some super low poly parts that is usable for the background, in this video we will model manually with the help of textures and references from Google Maps. Since I need large industrial structures, I started looking for photos that I can use as references and textures. Google Images did not give the best results, and images from the unknown sources are not the smartest to use because of copyright. Textures.com is a great site for free textures, but for this purpose I found only 2 photos that I liked. In the absence of ideas where to find references and textures, I remembered industrial area near me. But since I don't want waiting for a cloudy day to avoid shadows and go to that place to take photos of the textures, I got an idea to go to Google Maps and quickly realized that that is a good idea. The first big advantage is the infinite resource. Imagine how many things you can find on Google Maps without having to go there physically. When you find an object you like, the first step is to paste as many usable textures as possible into a large collage. You need a screen capture program. I use LightShoot, and a graphic program such as Photoshop. Now we can take a screenshot of the parts that we can use as textures later. If there is more material, you can create 2 or more images, or you can increase the resolution to fit more textures. In this way, we can create 1 or 2 materials that we can use for a large number of models later. We may need a new textures in the modeling process. Changing the dimensions of the image afterwards to create a new space is not smart because it will result in fixing the UV maps later. A better solution is to leave some empty white space. You have noticed that the images from Google Maps are not of high resolution, which may or may not be a disadvantage. What does it depend on? It really depends on only one thing: how far is the model from the camera. If you plan to place the model a few meters from the camera, you will notice the low image resolution. The further the model is from the camera, the less important the texture resolution is, because we see less pixels. Given that these are large structures that will always be somewhere in the background, resolution is not a disadvantage for us. In fact, it is good to save on memory and not slow down as seen with large textures unnecessary. Now that we have textures and references, we can start modeling. In this tutorial we will model 3 objects, but most of these tools and techniques can be applied to another objects as well. So let's start with modeling. You can find big structures, assets and other assets in project files as 15 step-by-step tutorials on Patreon or by clicking YouTube join. In the description there is also a link to my page where you can see a preview of the tutorials. Let's go with first practical example, and if you want to find this address on Google Maps, you can just copy these coordinates. Some of you ask me how to open a new Blender file without closing the first one. Right click on the Blender logo and click on Blender. I have prepared a reference image so that I can always have a look. Right click, horizontal split, open the image editor and you can load the image. I started with plane, SX to scale, RY 45 to rotate for 45 degrees. Tap to go to edit mode, 1, 2 or 3 on keyboard to skip between vertex, edge and face select. Now I will select these 2 edges and go with E and Z to stick to Z axis. With selected middle face in edit mode, I will press P to separate and choose. This part is now separate object. In edit mode with Ctrl R, I will add loop cuts which will be staged later. Now I will add wireframe modifier. You can see that one side is thicker than the other, that's because the scale is not 1. You can check the scale if you press N. To fix this, we need press Ctrl A and choose scale. Now we can adjust the thickness. If we hold Shift, we can increase the value slightly. To apply modifier, we can go with right click and convert to mesh. We can extrude faces on x-axis and get stages, but since we have a leg here, a better solution is array modifier, so that we don't have to add a new one to each step separately. With edge select, I selected one edge, P and separate by selection to turn it into a new object. Right click, set origin to geometry, tab to go to edit mode, A to select all, E to extrude, and Z to stick on Z axis. Face selection, with numpad 7 I go to top orthographic view and EX to extrude on X axis. With numpad/key we can isolate only object we're working on. This is very useful shortcut. Now we can work only on the stairs without being disturbed by unnecessary object on the side. Navigation is especially easy. Ctrl R for loop cut, Ctrl B to bevel. Ctrl R, scroll mouse up to add loop cut, SY to scale on Y axis, Ctrl B to bevel. Now we have faces that we can use for legs. Numpad/key to back to scene, numpad 1 for front orthographic, EZ to extrude on Z axis. With array modifier, we can increase count and we have stages. Now everything we add to one step will be visible to all. We can add a few bevels in visible places. Now we can select the fence, edit mode, several loop cuts and wireframe modifier. It is important to mark the boundary to remove overlapping faces. Now we can apply the modifier and circle the fence with Ctrl B. Now we can apply the modifiers to the stairs. If we select both objects, we can join them into one with right click and join. To create this part here, I will duplicate one of these faces, scale it and extrude it along x-axis. If you are not sure which axis is which, you can always look at this red and green line or this gizmo above. I will again extrude faces that we can turn into fence later. We can create this ribbed part easily. With I we can insert face, EZ to extrude on Z axis. Ctrl R for loop cuts. If we go with I twice, so I, we can insert face individually. To add more details, we can add cross lines with K for knife. We can create this roof simply by duplicating the face, adding loop cuts, Ctrl B to bevel and E for extrude. If we switch from bounding box to individual origin, we can scale each face individually with SX. With the solidify modifier, we can add thickness. With Shift R, we can repeat the previous action. This is often useful and works similar like array modifier. If you want to rotate the roof and column together, remember to switch from individual origin to bounding box and be in wireframe mode to select all. This is all for this first practice so that the tutorial doesn't take too long. My final models has a lot more details. All you need to do is follow the references and add details. The more details you add, the better and more realistic the model will look. In example 2, we will build a pipe with this circular part. I will start with cylinder. Before you click somewhere on the left bottom corner, you have tab where you can change the settings for the new object. I will reduce the number of vertices from 32 to 16 because we want to create a low poly model. Now we can select both faces. If we press F3 for search, we can search for bridge. That will make a hole. A faster way to find the bridge tool is to activate loop tool add-on. In edit mode, it will always be on right click at the top along with other options. Now we have the loop we want selected, but if we don't have, we can select the loop by holding Alt and click. Blender doesn't know which loop we want. It is necessary to click several times until it selects the one we need. Now we can use checker deselect option. By default is set to 1, which means that every other face is selected. If we increase the value, fewer faces will be selected. With I, we can insert face and Alt-T extrude along normals. I don't need to connect the parts in the middle, I just added a new cylinder. If we press L, we can select loose parts. With Ctrl B, we can add bevel to smooth object. To create a pipe, you can create a new object, but I will duplicate the face and rotate along Y-axis with R, Y, 90. E, Z to extrude along Z-axis. Bigger part, we can go with E, Z slightly. After that S for scale and I for insert. Now we can duplicate the lower part in wireframe mode. With G, Z bring it up and S, Z -1 we can rotate the object along Z-axis. To connect the part in the middle, I go with Ctrl R for loop cut, Ctrl B for bevel. Now we can select the front faces and scale them along X-axis to 0 with S, X, 0. We can do the same with the sides, with S, Y, 0. To create screws, I use loop tool circle option. In order for circle to have more details, we need more mesh. Right click and subdivide. If we have activate individual origin, we can scale the screws individually. With Ctrl B for bevel and E for extrude, we can add more details. Now that we have this part selected, with Ctrl numpad plus we can expand the selection and select all the screws. With Shift D we can duplicate the screws and with G, Z move it up. And with S, Z -1 reverse along the Z axis. Now I can extrude along the Z axis to get a pipe. With the spin tool I can create a curved part easily. It is necessary to select the edge that I want to rotate and the axis around which I want to rotate, in this case Y. Spin tool rotate around the origin point. Now it is necessary to set the origin in the right place. To set the origin we have to go with the Shift right click. With Ctrl B and Alt E we can create more details. In the last practice we will model low poly little house. First I will import our references that I will use also as textures as well. You may notice that I also took a screenshot of the sides so that I could project them later. First, I visually estimated the dimensions of the object. My estimate is about 3 meters on all sides. Now I can create the material and switch to the material preview because I will model following material on the object. On the left side, I will open the UV editor and for unwrap I will use view projection. Now I can project the front faces. I see that the proportions are not correct. Instead of stretching the UV texture, I will stretch the cube, apply the scale and unwrap again. That way I get more accurate proportions of the house. Now we can project the side part of the building. For that I use project from view. It is important to go with a similar camera angle as in the photo. I added several loop cuts with Ctrl R and with Alt E extruded some parts. I will continue with Ctrl R to add loop cuts following the lines of the texture. I extruded the glass parts in with Alt E. After that I separated the wooden part and extruded it out. Now that I have glass selected, I will create a glass material and apply the selection to the new material. I usually add viewport color. When I am in solid view, I can see where the material is. For the glass material, I mix the glass and transparent shader. To get more texture, I mix it with diffuse BSDF and use the texture. I used concrete texture for the roughness and created a new UV map so that it doesn't touch the color input. We can easily create the effect of broken glass with the knife tool. Also, as with the previous example, you can add more details to make the model look realistic. I use the Wireframe modifier for all mesh type elements, and there are a lot of them. If we activate the images as plain add-on, we can use a part of the image and follow the lines from the image to model the details. Ctrl R for loop cuts and K for knife are most useful tools in this case. If you want a cross mesh type, under mesh you can find the options spoke face and then trees to quads. Extra Objects add-on offers an option for a honey type mesh. There is also an option for the gear that can be useful with this type of models. Now that we have created a number of structures, we can add them to the asset browser, and the next time we need something for the background, they will be there. They are especially useful in abandoned or dystopian cities. You can find big structures, assets and other assets in project files as 15 step-by-step tutorials on Patreon or by clicking YouTube join. In the description there is also a link to my page where you can see a preview of the tutorials. These days I created this render. I used a background image and blended a CG element with it. I plan to record a process of creating the scene. If you are interested, don't forget to subscribe and like this video because it helps to grow channel.